Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here on the last night. I'm Flora Lichtman. I'm the host of the public radio show Science Friday. How many people know what Science Friday is? Most people. I'd love to see it. If you don't know, we're a 35-year-old science broadcast, a science news show. We do a lot of news you can use, like the latest in tech and medicine, and we do a lot of news you can't use, like black holes and immortal sea cucumbers. And tonight we are recording this session for our show, so thank you for being a part of it. We really want to hear from you in it, so clap and please laugh at my jokes and gasp when you hear shocking and amazing things from our panelists, and you'll also hear me do some goofy things, like say a couple intros, and I'll have to do some breakthroughs. This is the scintillating behind the scenes of how you make a podcast. So bear with me for that. Are we all ready? Everybody ready to get rolling? Okay. Are you all ready? Okay, let's do it. This is Science Friday. I'm Flora Lichtman. Hey, it's Flora Lichtman, and you are listening to Science Friday. We are coming to you today from Aspen Ideas Health with two leaders of a field that, in my opinion, is among the most exciting frontiers in medicine and biology. We are talking about the gut-brain connection. And look, we have a lot of language about trusting our gut feelings, gut checks, spilling your guts, getting butterflies. And they describe feelings that are familiar to us. I mean, let me just do a poll. Who here has gone with your gut in real life? Like the 10% of people who didn't raise their hand, I want to talk to you. But how well do we understand this connection on the biomolecular level? The connection between our brains and our bowels. Which of those organs is actually in the driver's seat, and what does it mean for how we understand diseases like Parkinson's or depression? Those are just some of the questions that we're going to churn through with my guests. Let me introduce them. Dr. Emran Meir is director of UCLA's Center for Neurobiology of Stress. He spent 4 decades studying this. Is it fair to call you a gut-brain OG? I'm going to take that as a yes. And Dr. Tricia Pasricha is a neurogastroenterologist at Harvard Medical School, and she's also a poop influencer, which I hope we can get to later. Thank you both for being here.
Thanks for inviting me.
Okay, Tricia, I've heard you say that our gut is a brain. I think of my gut as like plumbing.
Yeah.
Help me reframe.
Please reframe. We all grow up thinking about our gut as plumbing. That's very common. That's not how I grew up. I'm the daughter of a gastroenterologist. I'm the daughter of a neurogastroenterologist like Dr. Meir. And we have known for centuries that your gut is a brain. It contains 500 million nerve cells. That is more nerve cells than are in your spinal cord. And that brain, for some animals, it's the only brain they got. We call it the enteric nervous system. We humans have evolved to have a second brain in our head. Some people call the one in our guts the second brain. That's not what I call it. This is the first brain. This is your second brain. And they are evolutionarily very closely intertwined. And one of the ways that they communicate is the vagus nerve, and I know we'll talk a lot about that. But remember that your gut does a lot more than just transport and magically transform food into waste. It is constantly producing neurotransmitters, the same neurotransmitters that the brain in your head produces, like dopamine, which is what I study in my lab, serotonin. And it sends these signals up through the vagus nerve to the brain, and it's in the background, but it is constantly influencing our mood, our hormones, and probably most diseases in all of our body, our heart, our lungs, our brain, you can trace the origin to some extent to the gut.
Emran, would you call it an axis, a gut-brain axis? I've heard that used.
Yeah, no, I've been trying the last few years to change people's use of these terms. It's really much more common. It's not an axis, it's not a linear system that we can understand with our reductionistic scientific approaches. We look at it with systems biology, which basically postulates that everything is interconnected. It's a brain-gut microbiome system, and it these elements interact in bidirectional fashion, not just amongst each other, but they also are the main system in the body that regulates our homeostasis. So the basic balance within our bodies is dependent on the system. And that goes back in evolution, as Tricia mentioned, so the first marine animals, Plesia, they had an enteric nervous system lookalike structure surrounding basically just a tube that was moving and digesting everything together. With the development of a head in evolution, all the functions that were important for the overall body and survival were moved to the brain, using the same neurotransmitters in the same cells, were just shifted up there. Was the enteric nervous system, its main function became to run the intestinal function of secretion, motility, permeability, anything that has to do with the GI tract is run by the enteric nervous system fairly autonomically. There's animal models you can disconnect it from the brain, and it still has its peristalsis and still does the things it does in the intact organism.
It's independent.
Yeah, it is independent only if we get into a situation that threatens the whole organism, which triggers the fight and flight response. Then the brain basically gets involved in regulating the gut as well, but not in the normal homeostatic situation of balance.
And there's an uncomfortable truth there too, which is that, we can survive despite being brain dead, right? Why? How? Well, it's because we have a functioning enteric nervous system. As long as that is functioning and you still have some brainstem input with a breathing tube, you will survive because your enteric nervous system is still nourishing and feeding all of the other cells in your body. That's how important it is.
When we talk about the gut and the brain talking to each other, how are they talking? What is the mode of communication? Tricia?
Yeah, there's two main ways. Most of how we've thought about the gut-brain connection, I think, has been in terms of how the brain communicates with the gut. We live that experience every day, right? When you're going on a date, you get butterflies in your stomach, like Flora mentioned. Or if you're nervous, like suddenly you have to use the bathroom and it's your turn at karaoke and there's no bathroom in sight. Why? And then when you sing your song, suddenly you don't have to go anymore. And some of the ways those types of communications happen, some of it is hormone signaling. Some of that can happen through the bloodstream from the brain down to the gut. A lot of it happens through the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is this long cranial nerve. It extends down from the brain to almost every internal organ, but it has a very close relationship with the gut. Now, the gut, to communicate back up to the brain, it can't quite use the bloodstream the same way because the brain has enacted this really rugged barrier called the blood-brain barrier. And so it doesn't let a lot of things cross through, although some does. Most of how the gut communicates with the brain is through the vagus nerve. And the cool thing that we've learned is just how much of that communication in the vagus nerve is not top down. Most of it, 80% of it, is from the gut upward. So the gut is talking all the time. We don't perceive consciously most of that communication. Our conscious brains perceive what comes to us from our five senses, our eyesight, what we hear, what we feel, what we smell. But there's this whole realm called interoception, which is all the information from inside your body that is reaching your brain at the same time, 24/7, every second. Your brain has to grapple with that while also dealing with that outside information. That internal set of signals is called interoception. And your gut, all of it, that communication, for the most part, is happening without you consciously realizing it. And I think that's why it's been neglected for so long, but it's been happening under the radar nonetheless.
Yeah, just a comment to this. So there's a famous neurologist, Antonio Damasio. I don't know if anybody has heard that name, written some amazing books about consciousness. And so his whole, just we were recently at a meeting together, his whole concept is, and he's written about this over the last 30 years, that this interoception, so all this information that comes from the body, from our organs, but quantitatively the most from the gut, really, is the basis of human consciousness. So in evolutionary terms, and that's why he says that artificial intelligence will never have a consciousness because it doesn't have a body, unless engineers add a body with interoception system to it. So this communication from the bottom up less well understood as the top-down modulation. When you think about it, it's an interesting fact about the top-down modulation. All our emotions basically, I mean, our gut knows whatever goes on within our brain. And any emotion that we have, negative, positive, will have, so just like we see it in the facial expression, the muscles within your face express that emotion if you want or not. The same thing happens at the gut level. The gut changes with every emotion, and there's emotion-specific motility patterns and secretion patterns in the gut, and it goes all the way down to the microbes. So the microbes know when you are angry or when you're stressed, because the sympathetic nervous system, part of this signaling pathway, secretes molecules that acts on receptors on microbes, changes the gene expression of these microbes and their behavior. So there's a lot of studies on the effect on virulence of microorganisms and of pathogens. So when you're angry or stressed, you're more likely to get a more severe gastroenteric infection or more long-lasting symptoms, as if you're relaxed and your microbes don't get this warning signal from the top down. So there are many fascinating dimensions to this story that most people don't think about when they talk about gut health. But as you said in the beginning, this has really the potential for us to really reconceive the whole organization of our bodies and our brain.
That's very exciting, and I want to talk about some specific examples. Trisha, I know you work on Parkinson's. We know that's a disease where you have misfolded proteins in your brain. What's the connection to the gut?
Yeah. We have had hints that there may be more to Parkinson's than just the brain for a long time. If you go back to James Parkinson's early writing and his first case description of these patients, he did notice that they tended to have just incredibly severe constipation. He wasn't sure why. And when I started my GI fellowship, by chance, I started seeing a lot of patients with Parkinson's disease, people with Parkinson's disease, and they would just tell me, I have had constipation. It started 10 years, 20 years before these motor symptoms. And when you go look in the literature, it turns out that's been well described. We showed this, we replicated in my lab, but people tend to get nausea. Sometimes we call it gastroparesis when it causes a delay of movement of the stomach, constipation, and all kinds of GI symptoms years, if not decades, before the motor symptoms that we often think about as being Parkinson's related, like the tremors. And we think that for at least a subset of patients now, we know this, that the disease itself begins in the gut. And as you mentioned, Flora, Parkinson's is characterized by misfolded alpha-synuclein protein. It's this protein, when it misfolds, it causes the death of the dopamine neurons in a certain part of the brain. Well, they've done these studies that started in mice, and now we have human data that found that in some people, there's some trigger that happens. It's probably a different trigger for lots of people. There have been a lot of research and interest in pesticides, for example, paraquat. We've talked a lot about that in our field. Ultra-processed foods is potentially implicated. Maybe it's an infection. There's lots of different things that enter our body through the gut and potentially trigger that misfolding, or even other changes that we haven't yet quite understood that are related to it. But that misfolded protein starts to misfold in the stomach, for example, and then it propagates like a prion, which is a kind of disease that basically induces the next cell to start misfolding. And then that one causes the next one, and it goes up the vagus nerve to the brain. And it turns out in humans, back in the 70s and beforehand, we were doing this procedure called a vagotomy pretty often, where we would cut the vagus nerve for certain conditions, like really bad ulcers or severe reflux. Well, if you look at the natural history of what happened to people during that time period, and obviously we don't do this that often anymore. It's not necessarily like no one, and we shouldn't all be getting vagotomies, but if you look at that natural history, people who had that procedure, their risk of Parkinson's disease got slashed by almost half. And it tells us that that link is probably real, and we're looking into some of this in my lab today to try to figure out what are the triggers, why does it happen in some people, Obviously, and probably not all, though. There are some people where I think it does start in the brain. What makes these two things different?
Just adding a clinical vignette to this. So ever since this became apparent that this gut-to-brain signaling through the vagus nerve plays an important role in Parkinson's disease, so I've had quite a few patients coming to my office. And the one story that I really remember, which is fascinating, a couple that lived in the Central Valley, California, where all the agriculture comes from, but it's also the area that has the most intense glyphosate and pesticides and herbicide spraying over. So this family was actually calling their kids whenever they heard these planes coming, these dust croppers, to run into the house and lock the doors and windows. Mm-hmm. So when they were talking, I paid attention, I was watching them, and the husband had this sort of characteristic movement of his fingers, which is classic for Parkinson's. And so I asked him, how long have you had this? And he said, I never noticed that I had it. So I said, it might be a good idea if I refer to one of our neurologists. And so he had a very early stage of Parkinson. They had no idea that this was actually related to the visit, but he did have new onset constipation, which in a middle-aged male is sort of unusual, to develop. But since then I've seen several patients, and probably unusual to make the diagnosis of Parkinson's in this setting, just based on a finger movement. But yeah,
Does understanding this role of the gut lead to, are there new opportunities for earlier interventions or diagnostics? What is the meaning for patients?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the hope of our whole field, is that if you think about it, in a way it feels scary to hear that Parkinson's is starting in my gut, and maybe this is happening well before I would even know that it's there. But the other way of looking at that is to say, well, what an enormous opportunity we have. This means that maybe there is years of time, maybe even longer, where there's a window before the disease reaches our brain. And that's exactly what a lot of us in the field are trying to figure out, is can we identify a biomarker in the gut that will herald what may happen years down if we don't intervene? And of course, what we need to do is also come up with a way to intervene, and there's a lot of work being done on both of those fronts right now. So it's actually, we're incredibly biased in that, but it's a really exciting area of research, I think, in all of medicine right now.
I want to talk a little bit about GLP-1 drugs, because they feel like an interesting case study in this gut-brain system world. We know, so I'm talking about Ozempic or Wegovy, we know that they slow digestion, but they also seem to have effects on the brain. And we've seen evidence of this in early trials for GLPs and addiction, for example. What are they telling us about the gut-brain system?
Yeah, this is a particularly fascinating story. And there was some excellent panels at this meeting about GLP-1s, really fascinating. The one thing I noticed, basically nobody talked about the gut, because GLP, glucagon-like peptide, is a hormone that's stored in cells that are in the gut, that lie in the gut. There's about 40 different types of cells like this in the gut. The endocrine cell system, biggest hormonal system in our body, is actually in our gut. Now, you may have heard about the latest version of the GLP-1 drugs, which has now 3 of these peptides combined, and it's even more effective. And all 3 peptides come from the gut. So basically, what industry has done or has found out that, so you take these signaling molecules that are in our gut that have for hundreds of thousands of a million years worked perfectly well to signal satiety, generate all these signals to our brain that it knows what goes on in the body. But I think somehow our lifestyle, the changes in the last 100 years have overwhelmed the system. It's no longer working. So what industry and science has done, so you take these same messengers that nature has developed and give them in much, much higher doses, and they seem to be working. And it's not surprising that they work on multiple brain functions. I'm always been surprised in the beginning when people thought these are incretins that work on the gut, their main effectiveness. Well, one of the main locations of receptors for GLP-1 is in the brain. It is in the hypothalamus, in the nucleus of the hypothalamus, that regulates satiety. So that system that generates satiety after a meal basically could no longer cope with our dietary habits, and so we are replacing it. We don't know what the long-term consequences of that attack is, because right now it seems to be the only solution to the obesity epidemic and with all its associated comorbidities, the whole list of these chronic diseases that have appeared. They seem to be all interconnected. As I call it, the chronic non-contagious disease epidemic that affects everything from colon cancer to Parkinson's to Alzheimer's to, and so somehow with this system being compromised, and now we have a potential pharmaceutical solution to fix it, at least as long as you take these medications. I think this will dominate the discussion and the clinical practice for some time.
Do you think that's a good thing?
Pardon me?
Do you think that's a good thing?
Okay, so if I put on my scientific head and clinical head, I would say, yeah, it's a great thing. It can help so many people, save a phenomenal amount of money, because a lot of the interventions that medicine has come up with, from bypass surgeries to expensive drugs, all these costs will obviously go down. As was said in this panel recently, it will transform society. It has influences on the way, what kind of clothes people are wearing, how much exercise they're doing. So I think there's many good things to it. On the other hand, when you think about it, is it a good thing? So now humans at a certain age are already dependent on the statins and on antihypertensive medication. So now we add the GLP-1s. Is this the way we want to deal with our world that's gone out of balance? Or do we actually want to work more on the root causes that are causing all of this? So we can right now, we have pretty good tools now that we can prevent people dying from this, as long as they stay on these drugs. Obviously, a dream for the pharmaceutical industry,
Tricia, what's your take on this? Anything to add?
Yeah, I'm in agreement on most fronts here. I mean, I think what we've found so fascinating in GI is, a lot of people are hesitant about GLP-1s because they're worried about the GI side effects, and GLP-1s is something that we study in my lab too, and we're finding more and more that there are these effects that GLP-1s have that seemingly don't have much to do with weight loss, and I think that those other effects, for example, in my lab, we found that taking a GLP-1 medication, it's associated with a decreased risk of getting ulcers, of having damage to the mucosal lining of your stomach. It doesn't have anything to do really with weight loss. And these big studies have come out about how GLP-1 medications are associated with a decreased risk of 13 different cancers, not related to weight loss per se. And is exciting, and I keep saying that word associated with, and these studies are very exciting. We don't know the mechanism quite yet, and we haven't nailed some of that down. So I'm incredibly optimistic about them. I'm a realist that we'd like to help people in ways that don't involve medication. I am so on board with this medication because it will help so many people, though. And I think, though, that my pause is just, and we're working on this, is we need to understand in a lot more detail than we have right now what it's doing exactly molecularly and why some of these benefits happen. I think GLP-1s, just like a lot of, for example, neurotransmitters in the history of medicine, dopamine's a great example. What we know they do in the brain is not what they do in the gut, and they act very differently. Estrogen, like all of these things behave very differently in different organs, in different types of environment, and so it's a lot to unpack.
I mean, you made a comment that, we still don't know. So this is one of the most popular drugs ever. But you mentioned, we still don't know all the mechanisms. We don't know the long-term consequences of interfering with the system in such a massive way. And so I kind of lost a train of thought. I wanted to build on this. So you were saying, so we don't think, or you see many phenomena have been shown in studies that don't seem to have to do with weight loss. But one important thing about this gut system that I like to call the gut connectome, all these different cell types, immune cells, endocrine cells, microbes that are communicating with each other, there's a very close interaction with the immune system in the gut. So 70% of our immune system is not in the bone marrow, it's not in the spleen, it's not in the liver, it's in the gut. And most immune cells travel through the gut, even though they go to different organs, like the lung or the... So one question I have is, if we interfere with this GLP-1 antagonism, it could affect in a significant way this immune system activation that seems to be the basis for many of our chronic diseases. I sort of hate as a scientist to always say there's one explanation of all our diseases, and it's chronic immune system activation, but everything points now in that direction, which we never thought about before.
I noticed you were very careful to say chronic immune system activation and not hashtag chronic inflammation, which is what the influencers like to say.
It's not inflammation. It's something that you will not feel. It's like hypertension. You know, probably 20% of people in this room have that systemic immune system activation. So there's molecules circulating in your blood produced by immune cells in the gut that you won't feel, but they increase your risk, particularly if you have a genetic risk factors, to develop any of these other diseases, either later in age or when something else happens. So,
what's the difference between inflammation and that?
Well, in inflammation, we have, white cells or leukocytes coming to an area where you have an injury that gets infected and there's pathogens, and it's a very different mechanism. It has to do with our adaptive immune system, and people always make so they mix up these terms. I think the best comparison or example is high blood pressure, hypertension, which is there, and most people know about it, but 15 years ago, where this was not routine to check your blood pressure, they didn't. And then all of a sudden, seemingly out of the blue, they had a heart attack. So this is kind of a similar kind of situation. And this is in some ways related to obesity, but it also happens in people that have a metabolic disturbance and don't have, and are not obese. So it's...
Okay, I have to break the fourth wall here. Whatever wall, I need to break it because I have to take a break. So, and then we have to do a little experiment with this whole crowd. Okay, so here we go. We have to take a quick break, and when we come back, wellness TikTok. I feel like wellness TikTok really wants to promote #gut health, but I want to know what you guys have to say about it. Okay, stay with us. This is Science Friday from WNYC Studios. Okay, does anyone need to stretch or have a sip of water or stand up? You're welcome to. Yes. Thank you. Yes.
That's a good question.
We talked about that.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
So has this been flowing well?
Yeah. Okay, so everyone, if you could sit down, we have 2 more assignments. We're going to do 2 things. The first thing is the harder thing. I need everyone to be quiet for 10 seconds. I'm going to start now. You can't sneeze. You cannot cough. This is called room tone. Okay, let's do it. Whoever shushed, thank you. Okay, let's start now. Okay, great. And here's the next one. I need a little bit of applause. Like you actually are having the time of your life at Aspen Ideas Health. All right. All right, let's do it. You guys ready? Okay. This is Science Friday. I'm Flora Lixman, coming to you from Aspen Ideas Health in Aspen, Colorado. We're talking about the conversation happening in our bodies between our guts and our gourds with my guests, Dr. Emmer Mayer and Dr. Tricia Pesricha. What is a gut?
What is the gut?
What's the gut?
Well, the gut is sort of a simplistic term for the digestive system. I think the way it's being used, it would include all the parts of the digestive system from the esophagus all the way down to the end of your large intestine. In more scientific or gastroenterological terminology, it would be primarily the small intestine and the small and large intestine. So,
not my stomach.
That depends. I think in the whole fascination now with gut health, I think people include the stomach as well, but it's not.
This is a controversy.
I know,
this feels so spicy.
We're going to have such a hot debate, but I think the gut does mean the gastrointestinal tract, and we shorten that to the gut. So I think, like, in just common parlance, I'm with you. I think, like, when we as doctors are like the gut, we are really thinking about the bowels. But I do think, for being a little more technical, I think what people think about, it's everything from the esophagus all the way to the exit hatch.
Does it seem weird that we don't have an agreed upon definition?
Totally. It's a big problem for us.
Is it? For a gastroenterologist, it's a big problem?
I think part of this has happened because the unanticipated popularity of the term gut and gut health and wellness and gut and brain gut. I mean, this is something. I've been in this business a few years longer than and it's kind of amazing how this has changed. That question, you would have never asked that question in any conversation. So first of all, it wasn't discussed in public. You wouldn't talk about their gut because it was something. If you had IBS, it was something shameful. People would not, certainly not in a dinner conversation. Now the term gut is everywhere, and I think gastroenterology, the specialty, has sort of been taken by surprise. How all of a sudden their organ of interest is sort of
is everywhere.
Popular. Yeah, we're the cool ones now. Take that, neurology.
Well, why do you think social media has glommed on to the gut?
Yeah. I mean, Dr. Mayer is totally right. 10 years ago, when I was in med school, no card-carrying gastroenterologist would use gut health. Like they wouldn't talk about #gut health. And now it's everywhere. Now, I think we're actually realizing we have to use that word. The American Gastroenterological Association, which we're both members of, we're forming an advisory group to talk about how we need to own this space. Why haven't we owned this space before? Like, gosh darn it. Well, we're going to try to figure out, and part of that is defining what that is, right? Because most of GI, we think about curing disease, but maybe what gut health really is the absence of disease and preventing said disease. And that's obviously not been the focus for a lot of that 15-minute visit that you get when you already have a problem with your doctor. And I think, I spend a lot of time, for better or for worse, on gut health TikTok, on #gut talk. and I spend a lot of time in social media kind of talking about gut health. And so I think about this a lot. But my suspicion for why this has really blossomed is twofold. One is a good thing. I think Gen Z is so much less ashamed of their bodies than we were as millennials and everyone older than us, and they are destigmatizing mental health, they're destigmatizing gut health, and I love that. So I think that it's like wonderful that they are bringing this and leading the charge there. You guys think fiber maxing is cool? Wait till you hear about poop maxing. That's trending. So this is great. But I think there's a darker side to this, which we know so well. But one of the most common diseases in GI, I'll give you this example, is irritable bowel syndrome. 15% or thereabouts of Americans have IBS. This is one of the most misunderstood diseases in all of medicine, not just misunderstood by patients, but misunderstood by doctors. And yet it is so incredibly, we all know somebody with IBS. Maybe we've had it. Maybe we got COVID and we never pooped correctly the same. Like, this happens to all of us at some point. And I think when there's such a big void about that information, not that the science doesn't exist, it exists. I think we just haven't communicated it well. But when that void exists, I think then the influencers online, you enter this wonderful space as a patient where you go online. First of all, You can't get an appointment with your gastroenterologist for like the next 6 months. This is a big problem. Now you're scrolling and you see some really attractive influencers saying, hey, do you have bloating? Do you have brain fog? Does your doctor not take you seriously? It's leaky gut. And, or, fill in the blank, and they'll tell you all about their journey and all about the supplements that worked for them. And there's a million videos like this. And for the first time, you're somebody who's been suffering, and you feel heard. You feel seen. You feel like you're connected to a person. And that is, I think, almost like 80% of the gut health space right now. It's coming from people who are not physicians or the scientists, but it's coming from people who are helping connect with somebody who has been a little bit dismissed by, or greatly dismissed by the healthcare system. And I think that is the darker side of why this has become so popular.
Yeah, and I mean, being a gastroenterologist myself, and so I went through the first, I would say, 25 years of my career battling the dogma in gastroenterology that it's the gut. Many comments when I give a talk, people get up and say, Dr. Meyer, don't forget, it's the gut, when I talk about the brain-gut connection.
What do you mean they were saying it's the gut? They were like, the brain is not involved?
The brain is not involved. And I'm just based on that experience, this negative experience, and what's happening now, that this has sort of been taking the discussion has been taken away from gastroenterologists to functional medicine and to influencers, and the topic is widened to stuff that and entities that as a gastroenterologist you're not trained in. You're not trained what brain fog is, or all these symptoms that are now blamed on the gut in some ways, or gut dysfunction. Gastroenterologists are not trained in. So I'm not too optimistic that, you're definitely an exception, but I'm not too optimistic that this new awareness will come in gastroenterologists and patients. There's a tremendous growth of functional medicine, for example, because even though they don't have all the science, they have managed to incorporate this holistic concept that includes the brain and the rest of the body in their conceptualization of gut health. I mean, I may be wrong, but what I've seen so far, the interest is definitely shifted away from gastroenterology, which is a specialty trained in identifying diseases of the gut, not of the brain, and has developed, together with the pharmaceutical industry and with endoscopic procedures, very effective way of dealing with the gut, but not with these brain-gut problems.
We have to talk about the microbiome, because I feel like that's a huge part of this, and we haven't really dug in there. I mean, do we know what a healthy microbiome looks like? We know more diversity is better. I feel like I've heard that before, but do we know specifically what we're aiming for with a gut microbiome?
I think this has this definition has sort of developed a general consensus. And the concepts have been taken from ecology. So diversity and resilience are all the terms that we know from other ecological systems from nature that have been applied to a healthy microbiome. Is resilient to perturbations. It has a high diversity, has a high richness. So it's not just having 100 different types of bacteria, but each bacteria is just 5 or 10 members, but it's hundreds of thousands. There have been some attempts that based on the function, so the microbiome field has moved from asking who is there, which microbes are there, shifting pretty rapidly now to what are these microbes doing and what is their capacity, their genetic capacity. So in a few years, we won't have any microbiome tests that just look at who is there, but basically what they're doing. And one good thing that general agreement on is if they produce molecules, so-called metabolites, that they generate from breaking down complex carbohydrates or fiber. It's a group of molecules called short-chain fatty acids. Probably some of you may have heard this word, butyrate, which have a lot of beneficial effects on not just the gut, but also on the brain, every system of our body. One of the most important ones is probably this anti-inflammatory. So we have built into our body a production site for aspirin. That anytime we have an insult, the counterbalance, so that's why a healthy diet of a whole food diet is so beneficial because it nurtures the healthy gut microbiome function, which are to a large degree, not exclusively, but anti-inflammatory. So I would say these definitions, getting it down to which microbes need to be there in a healthy microbiome. There's also now large-scale studies that have identified like a handful of microbial species and strains that have been associated with the absence of diabetes or metabolic syndrome. But I think going with the concepts of these anti-inflammatory effects and microbes that have the genes to produce these molecules, in my opinion, right now is probably the best definition. It will probably change over time with progress in science.
What would you add to that?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think something that I find so frustrating right now in the world we live in is that I think that what we think about the microbiome is very tempered, and we understand a lot about certain associations with diseases and maybe the upregulation of certain microbes. But when you as a consumer, as a patient, hear about this, see it on social media, it feels very black and white. It feels like, let's check your microbiome. If you have too much of this bacteria, we're gonna cut it out. If you don't have enough of this bacteria, that's bad. Let's give you a supplement and we'll fix it, right? And the science is just not there yet. But we've started monopolizing on this and profiting off of it a little bit too early. And the way I think about the microbiome, just in simplistic terms here, is it's like a garden, right? And if you have this garden and you imagine what I want are a bunch of flowers and you start seeing weeds growing, you might just pluck out all those weeds because we don't want them. And let me sprinkle some beautiful rose seeds that I do want. And it's not going to be that simple. What if those roses aren't growing, not because the seeds weren't there, but because the soil pH was wrong, because you're not getting enough sunlight, right? And I think sometimes when we think about #gut health or just the gut in general, lately all we talk about is the microbiome, and we just really focus on that. But remember, the microbiome, these trillions of organisms, they exist in this ecosystem that is part of us. We have to think about how these microbes are interacting with our individual immune systems, with our nerves. One species, for example, of some microbe can behave very differently in me than it will in you because the milieu is very different, and we're seeing all of this play out in studies. So I find it frustrating when patients come to me and they're like, I have spent hundreds of dollars on this testing kit, the supplement, it's gotten me nowhere. Look at the results of my microbiome. Tell me what I should do next. I wish I could. I mean, what I can tell you and what I do tell my patients is here are the principles about healthy or healthful eating, that these are the types of foods that support the microbiome. But at this stage, we don't have targeted microbiome-directed individualized therapy just yet.
Yeah, and there's obviously a lot of, I shouldn't call it abuse, but commercial exploitation of that uncertainty it's an unfortunate phenomenon. Not for the companies, there's a billion-dollar industry, the probiotics and the prebiotics and the postbiotics and symbiotics industry comes up with always new expressions to justify a new supplement. But if you look at the evidence that these interventions make actually a significant difference, it's very weak. So you would not get an FDA approval for any medication with the weak evidence that exists for any of those biotics. And that's kind of unfortunate because I think I'm optimistic. I think we're in the second generation of probiotics right now. The next generation will have amazing things where it's already an active area of research where people manipulate the genes of certain microbes to do specific things. So for example, I've been involved in studies on so normally microbes don't like, or probiotics don't like to be in an environment of inflammation, so they don't survive there so now, people have engineered microbes that actually not only tolerate inflammation, but they thrive on the metabolites generated by the inflammatory process and grow as long as the inflammation is there. When the inflammation disappears, they die off and they won't have any substance. And there's many other areas where this is now happening, that we use probiotics as vehicles, or as vehicles is probably the best to take cargo. So these are the expressions that are being used in this field. Take a certain cargo to a specific part of the GI tract to do very specific things. This is still a long ways different from our current general probiotics. They take 15 strains and they tell you they're the best strains that have ever been isolated, and well, they have been tested in test tubes on, on cells, not in humans, and shown the effectiveness. I mean, I'm sure there's quite a few people here in this room that take probiotics. And
who takes probiotics?
yeah, I'm actually surprised it's not more, because
Yeah,
it's almost
It's a safe space.
we're not here to judge by any means.
Yeah.
But Emmerich, at the same time, and Trisha, I want to hear your thoughts on this too. I mean, I have heard about doctors sort of prescribing diet for, mental illness and other diseases. What do you think about that?
Well, that's a different story. I mean, diet is probably one of the most complex vehicles to deliver tens of thousands of molecules, phytonutrients, 8,000 different fibers. There's not just one fiber molecule. And when you eat something, a fiber-rich meal, it's not just eating one fiber, like inulin. You ingest thousands of these different fiber molecules. They all do different things to your microbes. So you can't really compare. When people have created this term psychobiotics, you take this one organism and they think it's going to change your depression or your anxiety or ADHD. I mean, it's ridiculous to think that way. But diet, there are emerging studies that have shown certain, and the evidence is best for, as usual, right now, the traditional Mediterranean diet, but also for certain situations like advanced Alzheimer's disease, a ketogenic diet, or for refractory epilepsy and children, also a ketogenic diet, but that's the exception. So in general, I think what this traditional Mediterranean diet concept is, it gives you thousands of these molecules that you can put into a capsule and think that this one molecule will actually be of great benefit to you. So that's my view. I don't know how you think about it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think they think actually this is why these alternative medicine and holistic providers do really well, is they give this holistic picture. Like, they will advise you a lot more on lifestyle and diet when you're dealing with something that doesn't necessarily feel that connected, like depression or anxiety. I mean, as Dr. Meyer said, the Mediterranean diet has been pretty consistently, reliably shown to be associated with reduced rates of depression, of mental health disease, and of course, neurodegenerative disorders. But that's not often part of the conversation, right, that you have when you go to see a primary care doctor. Like, it might happen briefly, but we don't dwell on it in the way that we should. But I think the other thing I want to just kind of point out about that is, we don't, when we're talking about something like depression and anxiety, to use that as an example, I think about that as being part of this gut-brain connection. I don't think of it as being purely in the head, just as I think of a lot of diseases not being purely in the gut. And so I think it's wrong to go completely in the other direction and say, let's just focus on diet when we're thinking about depression. I think we all have to think about looking at that connection, which often forms more of a connection, less of a connection, more of a vicious loop. How are we going to treat the brain in our heads and the brain in our guts, right? Like, I start people on antidepressant medications all the time for their GI symptoms, right? And vice versa. And at the same time, we need to also be thinking about diet. But I think there's one side of maybe more traditional medicine or these quick kind of visits where you say, all I've been told is to take a medicine. Then maybe you go to a more holistic practitioner, and all you get is sometimes supplements or lifestyle. We have to find that medium that is still very rigorously science-based, and that exists, but our model isn't always set up to have those longer conversations.
Yeah, I should also throw in there, so, even though I've spent most of my time looking at diet, microbiome interactions, and brain, but this model that has sort of evolved, and we've heard it in different versions here at this meeting, the blue zone concept, like these 6 or 7 or 8 components that are the main determinants, and it's the same thing in integrated in lifestyle medicine, where 6 criteria pillars have been identified. all these factors, from exercise, meditative, practices, happiness, they're all, because of this brain-gut connection, they influence the gut and the gut microbiome. So it's not just that, even though diet is probably the most well-studied and most important factor in this, these different pillars all act on the system. And the system translates it into gut health and brain health and immune health. So I think this holistic concept that I don't want to advertise for functional medicine. I always get invited to the meetings, but I always emphasize I'm not a functional medicine practitioner. But they got this right from the beginning. They look at health and wellness and disease from that perspective. From their perspective. So
I think this is the perfect time to turn it over to you. I'm sure you have questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand. Let's go to you. We've got 3 in the front here, in the white, and then here in the black. And I'm just going to, short reminder, keep your questions short if you can, and these are doctors, but not your doctor. So don't ask them about your condition. Okay.
So I know there's been quite a bit of research on newborns and both mode of delivery, so C-section or vaginal, and also, administering antibiotics either shortly before birth because of something like GBS, or in a newborn pretty quickly after birth, and the impact on their own gut. And I think there's a lot of fear-mongering in that space, kind of to your point, but I am curious, your views on the science, if you are familiar with this area.
I mean, the science is really well established on this particular, and it starts prenatally, because the mother has a microbiome that produces signaling molecules that go through the placenta to affecting the brain development of the fetus. So this really starts long before birth. But then the kind of things that modern medicine has been doing for quite some time, prophylactic antibiotics in the delivery room, then all the prematurely born babies who may be in an intensive care unit bombarded for weeks with antibiotics, all during a time when the microbiome is being programmed. So nature has sort of come up with this principle to program everything based on the first 1,000 days of life. Because that worked really well. So in the past, before we changed the environment so rapidly that this doesn't work anymore. And the damage that's being done and the reluctance of the system of OBGYN physicians to incorporate some of these recommendations that are detrimental to a healthy development. There's the argument, if you're C-section born, you don't go through the normal birth canal, and you're not inoculated with the mom's microbiome, the first inoculation. After a year, the microbiome of the infant of C-section born and vaginal delivery born are the same, but the damage happened already. So there's an increased rate of obesity, allergic diseases during this short period of time, during this first year. So I think the biggest impact that medicine could make, if it paid more attention to avoid any of these unnecessary antibiotic and also maternal health. I'm not sure how many pregnant mothers are being informed about this mechanism that their microbiome plays a big role in the brain development of their child.
I would just kind of add to that I get this question a lot from my patients. There's a lot of concern about breastfeeding versus formula feeding is another good example, how that would influence it. And everything that you've said is true. The data is the data. We know that these things influence it. But if there's a woman in front of me who's like, should I breastfeed? Should I formula feed? What is right for my kid? I say, what is right for you? What matters to me will always be what's right for the mother. And I think that's the bigger lens to take, is that sometimes I fear, and I see this, that mothers are making decisions about mode of delivery or breastfed or formula fed because of these hypothetical risks or even real risks. The most important thing you can do is treat yourself well and take care of your own health. And the cards will fall how they fall, not necessarily because of just what you've done here. There's so many factors in childhood that will play out, and we will work on that as they come. But if you do something to harm yourself as the mother because you think you're making something for some hypothetical risk, I have seen people do greater harm that way. And that's the most important thing that we shouldn't lose sight of, is that maternal health is so important. And I don't want anyone to compromise that because of some fear that they might have later on down the line for their child.
And there's this phenomenon, that we see many of these chronic diseases start earlier and earlier. We don't know exactly what the reason is. I mean, obviously it has something to do, again, with our modern lifestyle. But one point could be that it's the manifestation of the damage that's being done early in life during these first 1,000 days of life, that we've not paid enough attention to.
Right here.
Hi, this probably isn't quite as serious a question, and I understand why humans have to be careful with probiotics, but my dog takes them whenever he has loose bowels, and it works like a charm.
Thank you for your question. Tricia?
You're right. I have a dog too. I don't give her probiotics, although now I'm curious. But this is the whole thing with medicine and with all of our data, is that I have patients. I have human patients who come to me and they're like, wait a minute, but my probiotic works for me. Like, it did. It was the thing that helped me. In those scenarios, do you think I rip their probiotic from their hand and I say, like, let's look at these charts? That it didn't work for you. At the end of the day, I believe my patients, and I will say, great, like, if this worked for you, wonderful. What I fear is if we're treating you with something and we're missing a disease that we actually need to have caught, or there's a better treatment with other kinds of stuff, like whatever it is, as long as we're not missing that, I don't take it from you, because data always falls on some form of bell curve. This is like a whole separate conversation, but the placebo effect is very important in neuro-GI disorders. It's when we're talking about anything that might involve pain, that's real and important, and we think about this all the time. But the short answer is that if it's not harming you, I'm not so intense that I take it away from you, but I rarely ever start it. And sometimes what I find more often happens is I say, hey, you've been on this probiotic, like, how much better do you feel? And if someone's like, I don't know, like, kind of okay, then I say, okay, now we're gonna look at the charts. But if they're like, so that definitely works for me, like, I let it go.
Did we get a question here?
I'm following up on that same question. I take them, but I have a question. I've also read that sometimes your stomach acid destroys them. Is there a way to take them when you're taking supplemental probiotics, or is that just false rumor?
No, it's not a false rumor. This is the whole can of worms of probiotics right here, which is that we don't always know the best way to deliver the probiotic to the gut, right? Like, so many times you might take these capsules. First of all, the bacteria is already dead before you take it. Then they die along the way. Who's to say that the bacteria that have been sitting on this shelf for X number of months is going to not only make it to the right spot in your gut, to your colon, but then it's going to seed, and it's going to flourish, and it's going to make friends. We don't know. Like, the pills are just one form. And not only do we not know, I guess I would say we know that the data is bad for that, but there's more than one way to deliver a probiotic, right? Like, there's, like, you could do a fecal transplant on the other end of the spectrum, and that has also had somewhat disappointing results in a lot of conditions, promising in some. But that's what you've described is like sort of the whole problem, is that nobody can guarantee that will be the case, that it's going to actually manifest.
It's a really good question, because our gastric acid, the stomach is obviously the master in our body to produce concentrated hydrochloric acid, and the main reason we have this mechanism is to kill, pathogens, bacteria. So it's been optimized to kill bacteria, and there's few companies that sell probiotics that have really done the tests that they travel all the way down where they're supposed to be. They use this as marketing tools. If somebody asks me which probiotic should I take, I would usually ask them, make sure that there are studies on that product that they traverse the stomach intact, and that optimal concentrations are reached in the small and large intestine. Otherwise, forget, it's a pure placebo effect. And there's been all kinds of techniques that have been developed to encapsulate probiotics. There's one company that makes a big, I don't want to name it, but that makes a big marketing pitch out of their specialized capsule that transfers everything down there. But when you just remind yourself, the stomach has evolved in evolution as the bacterial killer. So it's not something that happens every once in a while. It does. Anyway, so that's all.
Agreed. I co-sign that.
There's so much to talk about. Obviously, we are out of time. I am so grateful to my guests, Dr. Tricia Pasricha and Dr. Emran Mayer. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Hang with me. I got to do a few more things. I'm so sorry. I have to read credits. And that's it for today's show. This episode was produced by Kathleen Davis. Special thanks to Tanya Bauer, Libby Franklin, Ryan Zinger, and Aspen Ideas Health for having us. BJ Liederman composed our theme music. And if this conversation made you hungry for more science content, subscribe to our podcast. Please subscribe to our podcast. Thanks for listening. I'm Flora Lixman. And thank you for coming.
This was great. Thanks.
Thank you.